Welcome to our third installment of One on One with Broadway director and choreographer and Tony nominee Larry Fuller.
Hello out there in Facebook musical theater land. Here we go again. Thanks for dropping in. And I think last week we had somehow gotten on to Keene in New York, which was the second show I did with Jack on Broadway. Jack Cole, that is. There was only one story I remember that I don't think I told. No, there were two. Working with Jack Cole on Keene, I was, of course, in the ensemble, and we had a big gavotte style opening number. It was took place at the end of the 1700s, and I had an entrance with my partner from the last wing, the last bay, upstage left, I remember. And my partner originally was Mary Mason. And she left as we were just starting out of town in Boston, I think, to do actually Liesl, the original in yes, Julie Andrews, can't think of the name, Sound of Music. And so she left the show, and we were short one female dancer as we were opening out of town. So I suggested to Jack, I knew a girl, a young woman, who would be perfect to replace Mary because she was a very similar type and an excellent dancer, Renee Jarman. And he took her on my word alone, which in a way surprised me. Anyway, so she came in and we were working that one day right after she got there. It may have been her first day, on our entrances in the gavotte in the opening of Keene. And we had to do, we had our arm up and the woman had their hand over on top of our hand, and we had to do a gavotte, which was just sliding your foot forward in fourth position. And we all were entering on different bars of music, and every time Renee and I started out, Jack would scream, "Stop, stop, stop, no, no, go back." And after about 3 or 4 times, Renee was getting really, really upset. I mean, she was starting to cry. And every time we would come out, I would give her a little tip about how Jack likes this and Jack likes that and so on. But he just wouldn't let up. So after, I don't know, as I said, 34th time, I got so angry because I wanted to protect my friend, and she was doing everything she could to do it right. And I walked out on stage, went right down center. And Jack, of course, was the only person in the house. And I said, "Well, for Christ's sakes, Jack, if you'd tell us what the hell to do, maybe we could do it." And he looked at me in shock. And then he slowly smiled and he said, "Nothing." And so I went back to Renee, upstage left. And so he said, "Okay, once more," and this time he didn't stop us. Who knows what went on in that head. But it seemed like he was just intentionally trying to break Renee down or something. I don't know. Anyway, that was during, as we were talking about last time, I think, the mean choreographers period. And destroy your dancers emotionally and they'll dance better. Who knows? Anyway, there was one other thing. Gosh almighty, what was it? Oh yes. When we were out of town in Boston, my parents came from good old Rolla, Missouri, to visit and see the show. And that night, after the show, there was a whole group of us from the cast that were going to see Eleanor Powell do her act at whatever the big nightclub was in Boston at that time. And she, in my estimation, she was the best of the Tapper ladies in Hollywood films. She was just amazing. By that time, she was probably around 50, but still tapping away. And we got to the club, and most everybody was already there. So there was this big long table full of cast members and Alfred Drake, who was also a cast member. And I started having to go around. First of all, I've always been awful about remembering names, terrible. So I was very nervous about it. And I started going around the table, and I remembered everybody's name, introduced them to mom, dad, and so on. And I came to Alfred Drake, and I blanked. I could not remember that man's name. And of course, you didn't have much time to adjust because he's sitting there smiling at my parents, and I'm going, and this is the star, and he accepted that. So I didn't get penalized for not knowing the star's name. I guess I'd appealed to his ego. Anyway, that was King. And I was leaving Redhead. I'm going back now to the chronological order of kind of what I've been talking about. So Redhead closed in San Francisco, and I came back to LA. I've already told you about that, helping to work on the auditions of West Side Story, the film. But I've already talked about that, and that I got hired by Jack Cole because they offered me in the film of West Side Story just to be an extra dancer in the dance at the gym, and I turned it down because I was going to be a principal dancer for Jack Cole. So there. Anyway, and I told you about doing the Kismet opening and Sing 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 and the African closing. And one thing though, when we were there, excuse me, and we were the only show on the Strip doing 3 shows a night, 7 nights a week. Some of the other shows did a third one on the weekends, but we did it every time. Anyway, between shows, God, here I go again. See, can't think of his name. Short, black, great. Sammy Davis Jr. There it goes. Sammy Davis Jr. Was appearing at the Dunes. I believe that was where they all did, Sinatra, Martin, all of them. And he set up on the top floor of the Dunes in a great huge room, an open bar, open buffet party that went on all night long for anybody that worked on the Strip, if they wanted to come there between shows or even after their last show, which I thought was extremely generous. And once in a while, I went there quite a few times, and once in a while he'd come in and say hello to everybody and then disappear. But I just wanted to tell you that story because he was such a generous man, and God knows talented. So back to leaving Las Vegas and going back to LA for a little bit. I had personally gotten involved with someone there, and I wanted to see them again. So I went back to LA, and I had, by that time, because of West Side Story, I had managed to get an agent, not a top one, but an agent anyway. And he submitted me to 20th Century Fox for their new talent program. They would sign a small group of new people, unknowns of course, to their studio contracts, and then develop them and put them in little parts in TV series and movies, whatever. And then if they seemed to click, they'd give them bigger parts. But so I went to see Here we go again. Why am I so today? Sandy Meisner, who was head of the New Talent program at 20th Century at that time. And this is the photo that got me in.
Oops.
Can you see that?
Tip it up a little. Oh, right. And then, yeah. Goodness.
Had nothing to do with it. Anyway, that photo got me in. And when I walked into his office, it was really the Hollywood version of the Ziegfeld office, huge. And he had this great big desk sitting at the far end of it. I guess that's so he could see you walk. Anyway, he was extremely charming, very, very nice. And God, he talked to me for 15, 20 minutes. But he said, Larry, as much as I would like to sign you to the new group of talent, contract players, I believe is what they were referred to as, the studio wouldn't let me because you're too small. Because I was only just kind of touching 5'8". And he said they only want guys that are like 6 foot or more because of putting them opposite some of their leading ladies, some of whom are quite tall, so they won't let me take you. But if you're going back to New York, I think I will be going there too very soon. And so he said, if you would like to take my class in New York, I will accept you into the class. And I thought, wow, well, this wasn't for nothing, because to get into Sandy Meisner's class was not easy. And so when I did go back to New York, which wasn't very long after that, I did start taking Sandy Meisner's class. And, and it, not because I thought I was going to be a great actor, more or less. I wanted to know the technique of how actors work, because it would be useful. Well, of course it was when I finally started directing. But anyway, Jack Cole had offered me a show in New York that he was going to direct and choreograph called Donnybrook, which was the musical theater version of A Quiet Man, John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara film. And we rehearsed, and it was all Irish, authentic Irish dance. And Jack didn't have that kind of vocabulary in his choreography. So he hired a Canadian man named Norman Maine, just like the husband's name in A Star is Born. And he knew all the authentic Irish dancing. And so Norman Maine really gave Jack all the steps, and then, like Anna White, he put them together into a number. And we were dancing, and we danced the overture in kilts, but we did wear something under them, since, you know, when you're turning, they flare up. But in this style of dance, you had to have your arms down to your side the entire time. The only time you could lift them was maybe when you were doing a leap where you tuck one foot under the extended leg and you could put your arms up like that. That was it. And there was one point in the number where we were all in the overture dance. We were all lined up in a straight line, all 8 guys, right at the edge of the stage, right over the pit. And we all had to do a double tour together at the same time. And it was very scary because that pit was right there. And I went to, on a matinee day, I went to an East Side cocktail party after the matinee. And I used to get invited to these East Side cocktail parties and other parties because I was then still very young and very attractive, and I was eye candy. So I went, and I had, I think, 2 vodkas with apple juice or something. I got drunk. I came back to do the show, and I was so afraid that when we had to do that double tour on the edge of the stage over the pit, that I would fall. And so we came to it, and Sue double tour. And what happened was I did a tour and a half, and I ended up facing everybody else when we finished. So they knew something was askew, but nobody said anything to me. I thought, oh shit, maybe the stage manager saw it, or George Martin was the dance captain, although he was in it too. And I thought, God, he's seen it. He was on stage with me. I'll be fired. But they never said a word, and I never, ever drank between shows again. It was a hard lesson, but at least it wasn't a tragic one. So we went out of town, and I don't remember what the reviews were like, but I know when we came back to New York, they weren't good. So we ran 8 weeks and closed, and then Jack had another show in his pocket, which he was going to direct and choreograph, named Keen. And I've already told you about that. Was Alfred Drake's last original role, written by Wright and Forrest, beautiful score, everything, and great reviews out of town. They had to cut it down too long, and when we got to New York, there were no great reviews. So it also ran 8 weeks and closed. And in the meantime, I would do Ed Sullivan once in a while, or maybe a little extra dancer on one of the other variety shows, musical variety in New York. At that time, there was a lot of work on television for dancers. And, made it work that way. And then there came Bravo Giovanni, which Cesare Siepi starred in. He was a Mozart opera star, had never done Broadway. And Michelle Lee was 18, and she did the female lead. This was not very long before Not I Can Get It For You Wholesale. How to Succeed Without Really Trying, which she also starred in, and that really kicked her career off. And anyway, Maria Kornilova was in it, and her husband George, here we go with the name again. Anyway, they were both in it, and Carol Haney choreographed it. And this was the first time I worked for Carol. I went to the audition and I got the show. And I think because of my Jack Cole training, she recognized the technique, because she was also trained by Jack. Anyway, so there I was in Bravo Giovanni, and having really a nice time, because I loved Carol's work. But there we were again, out of town, this time in Detroit, I remember, a flop. And we came into New York and stayed a flop. So it was another like 6 or 8 weeks, and it closed. And then there was a show running, which had been open for several months, called No Strings, which was written by Richard Rogers and Martin Charnin, starring Diane Carroll and Richard Kiley, about a black woman who'd gone to Paris and become a famous model. And Alan Johnson, some of you know him, also an excellent choreographer, unfortunately not with us anymore, but he was dancing, one of the dancers in the show, and my good friend Wakefield Poole, who also became a choreographer, but unfortunately never had a hit show, although he did direct the first gay porn movie that had a real story called Boys in the Sand, which was a huge hit way back then. Anyway, so Wakefield Poole taught me Alan Johnson's part in No Strings. And I had to promise, because at that time, Equity, there was a chorus contract and a principal contract. It wasn't the same. And the chorus contract, you could leave the show by giving a written notice 30 minutes before, before 30-minute half hour. It had to be before the half hour. And you only needed to give them a 2-week notice. So I was getting ready for my first performance, and lo and behold, over the public speaker in my, if you've ever been backstage at a Broadway theater, there's nothing very glamorous about it. And we all had like little concrete cells on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors where there'd be 3 guys in each dressing room. But anyway, this public announcement came, Larry Fuller, come downstairs right away, you have a phone call. So I thought, my God, who would be calling me here right at this time? So I ran down the stairs, all the way to the basement, public phone, by the way. It was Carol Haney. And she said, Larry, I would really like you to do the Perry Como show with me this year. Well, the Perry Como show was one of only 2. The other was the Gary Moore show that had 3 dancing couples all season. And if you were one of those 6 guys, 6 women, you had hit the pinnacle of group dance in New York anyway. And you also got paid more. And I had decided to go into No Strings so I could sit in it and go do like 1 or 2 Ed Sullivan shows every week, because I was doing them, and they did allow you to be in a show, and they scheduled around the matinee problem. But to be on the Perry Como show every week for the whole season, wow, that was a gold star. So I said, well, Carol, that's wonderful, I'd love that. And she said, well, there's only one hitch. Peter Gennaro is the official choreographer for Perry Como. And he's out of town doing a show called Mr. President, also a flop. And I'm only doing the first 6 weeks, and then he comes back and takes over. And I said, oh, well, gee, I can't do that, Carol, because, I'm just going into this show tonight, No Strings, and I'll probably be able to do a couple of Sullivan shows every month, and, I'm going to just sit in the show for a while. But if you could get Peter to take me for the season, I'll do it. And she said, okay, give me 10 minutes. I said, well, that's about all you've got, because I have to turn my notice in before half hour. And so I went back up to my dressing room and kept getting ready. Larry Fuller, another announcement. You're wanted on the phone. Come downstairs. And I thought, it's got to be Carol. So I ran down all the stairs again to the basement, to the public phone. Now, how she ever got the number, God only knows. A public phone backstage. And she said, okay, Peter said, fine, he would like to take you. And I said, really? Wow. So I had Perry Como season. I think it was 26 weeks then. Anyway, so I ran back up, wrote my notice as quickly as I could, ran back down, and just as it was about to tick right on half hour, I handed in my notice. The production stage manager read it, and I thought he was going to explode. He was so angry because it was my first night of the show. And I had promised I wouldn't leave. So anyway, I went up to Wakefield Pool's dressing room and I said, Wake, I have to tell you something. And I did. And I apologized as much as I could. And he said, Larry, I understand. It's okay. Because he had to go back into rehearsal to put another person in the same place in the show. So anyway, I did my 2 weeks and I left and started the Como show immediately the next week. And did the whole season. And that's about the time I met Michael Bennett. And Bob Avian, who was a friend of mine from Dancers Being Friends, introduced me to him at the Roxy Bowling Alley bar. Because every Thursday night, at least at that time, and the Roxy Bowling Alley doesn't even exist anymore, but every Thursday night there would be bowling teams from each show, like the softball league, and we just, it wasn't serious. Who cared whether you won or not? We were just having a good time. And Michael and I got to talking and hit it off, and 4 years later, so we were together then about a little over 4 years. And I can tell you a few anecdotes about that, but I'm writing a book, and there'll be all of these goodies in it, so you'll have to buy the book. Because there's some real goodies about Michael and me. Anyway, I think that's about where I'm going to end off today. Are there any questions?
We did have one from earlier. Someone said, Larry, you're always the best dressed man in the room. Who helped you develop your sense of style?
Edith Head. No, I'm just kidding. She was very famous for designing film stars. I don't know. I guess you just get sophisticated and you look around the room and rehearsal. When you're working in New York in the musical theater, you're surrounded by people that know how to dress, and also a lot of other people who never will know how to dress. But I guess that's where I got it. Anyway.
Anything?
Nothing. Nobody wants.
We're waiting. We're opening it up for Q&A now, so that now would be the time to send in your questions if you have any about his career or anything you heard today or last week or what may be coming up. This would be your time just to go ahead and type them on your screen, and I'll relay them to Larry, and then he will answer the questions.
Was Michael still a choreographer at that point when you met, or was he a dancer?
No. We were both, as I refer to it, still chorus cuties.
Okay.
I think Michael at that point was in Here's Love, which was a musical version of Miracle on 34th Street. And it was choreographed by Michael Kidd, who was also a very famous, terrific choreographer. And so we were both working as a group dancer at that time. This was a 62, 63 Como season.
Did you ever work with him as a choreographer?
He choreographed me I did a number with Joey Heatherton on the Hollywood Palace. I partnered her, and it was a number set to I'm All Smiles. And Joey was a lovely young woman, usually known for shaking all of her very nice attributes. But we did this lyric number, and she was very good, except that she was a ton of bricks to lift. She had no idea how to be lifted. So luckily I was still very young and very strong to get her off the floor and back down again. And one thing that happened there was, it was the Hollywood Palace, and the person that was on before us was Milton Berle. And he had a pie throwing sketch at the end of his time on. And so they mopped all of the whipped cream up and so on. And I'm sitting on this big poof, ready to dance with Joy Heatherton, and she's singing the song, just kind of walking around and coming around me and looking longingly at me, and I didn't do anything but just pose. And then at the end of her singing the song, she was almost on the other side of the stage, and I was to get up and run to her. Well, I got up and took about 2 steps and fell flat on my ass.
No.
I mean, flat on my ass. My feet went, both of them, straight up. And it was because Milton Berle's whipped cream didn't mop up too well. There was still grease on the floor. So they had to stop the show, well, stop the taping. And it took almost 2 hours for them to strip the floor and re-wax it and rebuff it.
Oh gosh.
And then we did the number. Yes.
We have, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Monet Lachance says, what was it like working with Peter Gennaro?
Peter was love. I loved working with Peter. He was so much fun. And there was one thing about Peter that all the dancers always had a bit of problem with. He never counted. He would do this step and he'd go, something like that. And so we said, where's 1? Where's 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Obviously, the dancers count. But then you learned not to ask. You just went, oh, boodly-out-and-doot-and-do, or whatever it was. A lot of very fancy, small footwork and kicks and stuff. Peter was almost self-taught. I think he was from New Orleans, and he learned how to jig dance on the street. That is not a political slur, but that was what it was called at the time. He was so charming and so wonderful, and he danced with us on the show quite often. So when Peter was on, he was deaf, more or less, and he had hearing aids. So when we would do a number with Peter, they had to turn the soundtrack up so loud it almost burst your eardrums. Oh, there was one thing too. I remember a famous story about Peter and dancing for him. We were asked, as a group, Peter Gennaro dancers, to perform at the birthday party for Lyndon Johnson at the old Madison Square Garden, which was on 8th Avenue and 51st or something. And so we were going to do, oh God, come on, something rag. Da-da-da, da-da, da-da-da, da-da. Anyway, a really fast footwork number with straw bowlers and so on.
Manette LaChance said she can relate. She worked with Jamie Rogers and he never counted either.
Jaime Rogers.
Jaime. Sorry.
Jaime. Anyway, we were wandering around the big circle around the outside of where you went into the actual arena. There is a door, and then many feet further on there's another door, and each door led to an aisle that led to a theater stage in the round in the middle of it all, where they usually did boxing and things. And there were security guards, of course, at every door, because the president was there. And Peter, in his excitement, he forgot which door we were supposed to go in.
Uh-oh.
So we were running from door to door. Come on, Chase, come on, come. It's this one. I think, oh. He had a lateral lisp, and it was so lovable. And we got to this one door, and he said, "This is it. I'm sure this is it." And so the guard, the secret service, whatever he was, he said, "No, you can't go in there. You can't." And Peter said, "Oh, well, we've got to do a number. Come on, let's in." And the guard said, "If you go in there, you may get shot." And Peter said, "Come on, kids." And of course, the dancers followed him. We had to sneak crawl like in grand plie halfway down the aisle. And Peter said, "Well, when the music starts to come, I'll stand up. And then you guys stand up right after me." So, and we were still in the aisle. So the music started, he stood up, we stood up, and I said, "God forbid somebody's going to shoot us." But they didn't, so we got on stage and we did the number.
Mr. Randy Downey asks, wasn't the opening dance in Keene a polonaise and not a gavotte?
Well, thank you, Randy. It could have been, I don't know, I've always thought of it as a gavotte. But I guess it was a polonaise. Anything else?
No other questions. People are having a good time. Wow, thank you. Great stories. Having a good time. So, great. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and we'll be back on Thursday at 2 o'clock.
Howdy doody.
And we will have a lot more for you on Tuesday or on Thursday at 2 o'clock Pacific time. Tell your friends they can go to Ray Lamone's Facebook page to watch, or they can go after the fact. They can watch it as well afterwards. They'll just have to scroll through his feed and find it. But we'll post it, try to pin it to the top this time.
And we mustn't forget to remind you that if you're appreciating this enough to dig into your not so full pockets these days, I know, but give something to the Actors Fund, because they're really, really in trouble. So if you would give it in my name. And how do you do that?
We'll put a link. I'll add a link to this post when we finish it up today. So we'll pin it to the top of Ray's page. You'll see the link to the Actors Fund, and you can make a donation directly to them in Larry's name.
Thank you. I hope you can.
We will see you all on Thursday.
Bye-bye.